This December, two events took place whose full consequences for the world and Ukraine will be fully realized only later. The EU and the G7 took two ambitious steps towards reducing dependence on Russian energy and strengthening their own energy security. The first event. On December 5, 2022, the EU embargo on the supply of Russian oil by sea came into effect. At the same time, the G7 and Australia introduced a price ceiling for crude oil at the level of $60 per barrel. This price restriction applies to crude oil, petroleum oils, and oils derived from bituminous minerals originating in or exported from Russia. Earlier, EU countries refused to buy Russian oil, so this step concerns third countries. According to Bloomberg, during the first full week of the embargo on Russian crude oil exports to the EU, its volumes fell by 1.86 million barrels per day to 1.6 million barrels. This fall had reasons in addition to the embargo, so the effectiveness of the embargo itself can be assessed only later. Event 2. On December 19, 2022, after long discussions lasting many months, the energy ministers of the EU countries decided to introduce a gas price ceiling under which contracts can be concluded by the EU countries. The mechanism will enter into force on February 15, 2023 and will continue for a year. It is noteworthy that the final value of the price ceiling turned out to be significantly lower than the initial EC proposal, €275. These decisions indicate radical changes in the attitude of the West in general and the EU in particular towards energy cooperation with Russia. In 300 days, our partners went from perceiving Russia as an eternal, basic supplier of energy to abandoning Russian gas and oil. Britain said on Friday it has given Ukraine more than 1,000 metal detectors and 100 kits to deactivate bombs to help clear minefields in the latest instance of military support for the country in the conflict with Russia. Russia's use of landmines and targeting of civilian infrastructure underline the shocking cruelty of Putin's invasion, British Defence Minister Ben Wallace said in a statement. This latest package of UK support will help Ukraine safely clear land and buildings as it reclaims its rightful territory. The metal detectors, made by German firm Valen, can help troops clear safe routes on roads and paths by helping to remove explosive hazards, the Defence Ministry said, while the kits can de-arm the fuse from unexploded bombs. Wallace said on Thursday Britain would allocate £2.3 billion, $2.77 billion, to Ukraine in military aid in 2023, matching the amount it has provided this year. Ukraine is investigating more than 58,000 potential Russian war crimes, killings, kidnappings, indiscriminate bombings and sexual assaults. Reporting by the Associated Press and Frontline, recorded in a public database, has independently verified more than 600 incidents that appear to violate the laws of war. Some of those attacks were massacres that killed dozens or hundreds of civilians, and as a totality it could account for thousands of individual war crimes. Throughout the war, Russian leaders have denied accusations of brutality. Still, the resulting database details 10 months of attacks that appear to violate the laws of war, including 93 attacks on schools, 36 where children were killed, and more than 200 direct attacks on civilians, including torture, the kidnapping and killing of civilians, and the desecration of dead bodies. Among Russia's targets, churches, cultural centers, hospitals, food facilities and electrical infrastructure. The database catalogs how Russia utilized cluster bombs and other indiscriminate weapons in residential neighborhoods and to attack buildings housing civilians. An AP investigation revealed that Russia's bombing of a theater in Mariupol, which was being used as a civilian shelter, likely killed more than 600 people. Another showed that in the first 30 days after the invasion, Russian forces struck and damaged 34 medical facilities, suggesting a pattern and intent. Experts say Russia under President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly ignored the rules established by the Geneva Conventions, a series of treaties that dictate how warring countries should treat each other's citizens, and the Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court and defined specific war crimes and crimes against humanity. Of 69 cruise missiles launched by Kremlin forces from strategic bombers and ships in the Black Sea, 54 were shot down by air defense systems, according to Valery Zaluzhnyi, Ukraine's army commander-in-chief. In a separate incident, Belarus said its air defense shot down a Ukrainian anti-air rocket over its territory. The U.S. is considering sending Bradley fighting vehicles to Ukraine as part of a further package of military support, according to people familiar with the matter. Overnight, Russian forces hit energy infrastructure in Kharkiv with Iranian-made Shahid drones, killing one person, Ukrainian officials said, adding that air defense forces shot down 11 Iranian-made drones. Several buildings, a gas pipeline and a power line were damaged in an attack on the Zaporizhia suburbs, Oleksandr Sterik, the regional governor, said on Telegram. 3 Russian missile carriers are now on combat duty in the Black Sea, according to a statement from the Ukrainian Southern Command. Alyona Verbitska, an advisor to Zelensky, said Russia had confirmed that it was holding more than 3,000 prisoners of war. She said 15,000 people were missing, many of them civilians. The U.S. government is considering sending Bradley fighting vehicles to Ukraine as part of a further package of military support, according to people familiar with the matter. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, will discuss the most pressing regional problems during a video call planned for Friday, according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. The two leaders are holding their end-of-year talks after Xi told former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev last week that China would like to see negotiations on Ukraine, adding that his administration was actively promoting peace. China has avoided criticizing Russia over the invasion, blaming the expansion of NATO. While Beijing signed off on a communiqué at last month's Group of 20 summit in Indonesia that said most members strongly condemned the war in Ukraine, China continues to refrain from calling it a war. Authorities in Ukraine have reported a fresh wave of Russian missile strikes across Kyiv, Zhytomyr and Odessa. Blasts were reportedly heard in several cities as anti-missile systems shot down incoming missiles. According to Ukrainian officials, Russia has fired some 100 missiles. This comes as France's defense minister Sébastien Lecornu on Wednesday pledged further military support to Kyiv in an audience with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, insisting his government's backing is unflagging. Lecornu said support would include French army equipment and a €200 million fund allowing Ukraine to purchase weapons. Earlier on Wednesday, in his annual speech to Ukraine's parliament, Zelensky urged the European Union to open membership talks with his country after granting it candidate status in June. He also praised relations with Washington, saying its decision to send Patriot missiles is a special sign of trust in Ukraine. France has supplied Ukraine with a substantial chunk of its arsenal of Caesar cannons, anti-tank missiles, Crotal air defense missile batteries and rocket launchers. It is also training some 2,000 Ukrainian troops on French soil. Western military aid to Ukraine has angered Moscow. On Tuesday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused Washington and NATO of fueling the war with the aim of weakening Russia and warned the conflict could spin out of control. In total, Ukraine has purchased around 4,000 drones, mostly for reconnaissance, the minister stated. These includes models such as the Fly-Eye, a small unmanned aerial vehicle used for battlefield surveillance. And the next stage, now that we are more or less equipped with reconnaissance drones, is strike drones, Fedorov said. These are both exploding drones and drones that fly up to 3 to 10 kilometers and hit targets. He predicted more strike drone missions in the future, but did not elaborate. Oleksiy Reznikov, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, earlier said that in the last 30 days, 7 prototypes of Ukrainian-made UAVs were admitted to service in the armed forces. Russia's defense ministry taunted Ukrainians with the prospect of never-ending missile attacks early Thursday as it unleashed a fresh wave of cruise missiles on cities across the country, and the Kremlin rejected negotiations with Kyiv. Ukrainian defense systems shot down at least 16 missiles heading toward the capital, authorities said. Nationwide, 54 missiles out of 69 were intercepted, according to Valery Zaluzhnyi, the commander of Ukraine's armed forces. Firefighters worked to contain a fire that broke out after a Russian strike at an electricity station in Kharkiv, Ukraine, in this screen grab from a video released on December 29, 2022. 3 Russian servicemen were killed earlier this week at the same airbase in what Russian authorities said was a Ukrainian drone attack. And it appears the fear of Ukraine taking the war to Russian territory has spread to the Russian capital, as the Kremlin was forced to respond Thursday to a question on whether Moscow is prepared for Ukrainian drone attacks. Ukraine's spy chief, Kyrylo Budanov, told the BBC on Wednesday that Russia is now completely at a dead end on the battlefield, while Ukraine's ground forces have also been slowed down by the cold weather. The Kremlin appears to be counting on further escalation, or fear-mongering, to create the appearance of a military win ahead of New Year's.